Hello, friends. We are back with episode 174 of the R Weekly Highlights podcast. My name is iamYannC, and I'm so delighted you joined us from wherever you are around the world on your favorite podcast player or other media device. This is the weekly show where we talk about the latest happenings and resources that are shared every single week on the rweekly.org site. And again, my name is Eric, and this is usually the part where I tell you I really don't do this alone anymore, but unfortunately, I am flying solo today because my awesome co-host Mike Thomas is cranking out on a tight deadline. He's creating some very innovative solutions with VAR and probably Shiny involved, but he's heads down with that, so he's not able to join us this week. But he'll be back soon enough. And with the week off that we had last week, I wanted to make sure we got an episode out to you this week. So yeah, I am flying solo, but this was a rather unique situation where, guess what the curator is? It was yours truly, yay! And it just so happened to be the week that I was at positconf, which is actually going to be what I first talked to you about here. And by the way, if you're listening to this show on one of the more modern podcast players, you may notice that we have chapter markers inside. So if you're not as interested in learning about my experience of positconf, feel free to skip over to the next section. But since it's fresh off my week at positconf, I wanted to take a few minutes to share some of my takeaways and just my overall experience. First of all, Seattle was a nice area. I'd never been there before, but the Pacific Northwest was quite nice on the eyes, so to speak, and had relatively smooth travel there. And right away, I was pretty busy, I must say. My first day, I guess conference related, if you will, was attending what we call the R Pharma Summit, which happened last year at positconf, but I could not join because I was actually teaching a workshop about Shiny with my co-host Mike last year, which again was very well received. But this time around, they had the summit the day before workshop. So met a lot of my colleagues that are in the pharma industry that I've been collaborating with quite a bit with the R Pharma conference and my efforts of the submissions working group and whatnot. And it was very nice to collaborate on some potential new project ideas, going over some new things that we can do with Shiny in the clinical space and things we can do with data formats and package validations and qualifications as a whole. So great shout out to all my R Pharma peeps that were there. Lots of great ideas and had a lot of engagement to pursue some new adventures that you may be hearing about very soon from yours truly. So then the next day was the workshop day, and I have been enamored with the DuckDB database system, which you've heard us mention in many highlights of this year and last year. So I was thrilled to be given the opportunity to learn at a workshop this time around, led by Kiro Mueller, who is the lead of Syncra Research, a consulting firm in Europe, and he is such a wizard with databases. Some of you know that he has spearheaded many of the R database packages. He's actually worked with the R Consortium to get funding for that effort, and it was a thrill to see him lay out some of the basics, but also some of the advanced features that DuckDB offers you as an R user and data scientist trying to analyze large data sets. And I am more than ever convinced that this is a tooling that I need to pay attention to, and I want to start implementing in my future projects. So the workshop was awesome, a great mix of lectures and hands-on exercises. It's sometimes cliche, but Wi-Fi issues hampered us for the first hour, but I was a good little student, if you will, and downloaded all the materials beforehand and was able to get it working on Positron, no less. I decided to live dangerously and use Positron beta version as like the IDE for working on the workshop exercises. And other than a little bit of quirks here and there, it actually performed quite well. So that was a good way for me to test the waters of Positron in a real applied setting. So I'll definitely have more thoughts on that as I get more use of it. But overall, again, the workshop was spectacular, and DuckDB is definitely going into my toolbox very, very soon. And on to the main conference itself. So yours truly had the pleasure of giving a a talk about my adventures of WebAssembly and Shiny in the context of my efforts with the R Consortium Submissions Working Group. It was early in the conference. It was right after the first keynote in one of the first sessions, which had the awesome name of Drugs Not Bugs, efficient uses of R and Python in clinical work. And again, really, really fun presentation. I hope it was well received. It seemed like it was. Definitely had more of a story to tell in the initial goings, but my main point I wanted to articulate was that this is a fundamental paradigm, shift in technology that I think can really supercharge many efforts where tedious, static reports of some nature could be made interactive and shared efficiently across, say, different reviewers or different audiences. So I was thrilled to be given the opportunity, and certainly my thanks to Posit for accepting my abstract and letting me be a part of this session. Had a really good turnout in the room, had lots of great questions, both in the Q&A panel as well as afterwards. So again, huge thanks to everybody that listened there live, and the recordings will be out fairly soon, and I can't wait to share that with all of you. Nonetheless, I will put a link to my slides in the show notes in case you want to look at that before the recording. It's got some nice links to the GitHub repository and whatnot that I've created for the projects. And like I alluded to in the presentation, there's much more to come in this space as we finalize our submission to the FDA, as well as our adventures with the container piece of the submissions working group pilot as well. So yeah, then I could breathe again, so to speak, with the presentation done. And I attended many talks, and as usual, it's hard to choose when you got a lot of good talks happening at the same time. I learned some great new things about Shiny development that I'm going to take back in my work, especially with some production apps I'm working on currently. Some good best practices of user interfaces and other great tooling that I think I'm going to adopt quite soon in terms of structure and ways I organize some of my files and whatnot. Lots of good content as well. And honestly, one of the best features of these conferences is the hallway conversation. So lots of great conversations, both with my fellow compatriots in life sciences, but also listeners out there that are fans of this very podcast that came to say hi. And I was very appreciative of that. It's always humbling to hear that this little humble effort that myself and Mike lead here is helping people in their data science journeys. That never gets old, no matter how long I've been doing something like this. And having that feedback is a great way to keep motivated and keep going with this effort. So met a lot of new faces as well. I met Colin Gypsy from Jumping Rivers. He was there at the conference, had lots of great conversations with him. And also I was thrilled to meet Charlie Gao, who had a joint presentation with my teammate Will Landau on the use of Mirai and Crew for high-performance computing and asynchronous processing. Wow, it was an awesome presentation. I can't wait for that recording to go out because Charlie and Will absolutely knocked that one out of the park, and it was just, the enthusiasm was infectious when you could see them talking about this great tooling that they've been working on. And yeah, I was just kind of beaming with pride in the audience there, where I barely found a seat. It was almost standing room only. So lots of excitement in this space. So credit to Charlie and Will for a fantastic talk there. But yeah, it was an absolute thrill to meet Charlie in person as well, and met many other people I've seen online. Lots of great conversations. And in fact, we had a mini reunion of sorts with our streamer group, the group of including Tan Ho, Daniel, Kyle, and others, and Jeremy as well from Posit. We met him for the first time in person. It was great to catch up on memories, even though we've all, for better or worse, have not been able to stream as much as we would like since those early days of the streaming during the COVID pandemic. Nonetheless, it was great to catch up on memories and see what they're all up to. And yeah, lots of fun time to be had in those conversations as well. And certainly, yeah, the conference kind of flew by at that point. And before I know it, I'm flying out early Thursday morning back here to the Midwest. That was a early flight, so that day was kind of foggy, but I was already looking at my notes of things I want to research when I get back, and I'm already doing that research as of now. So lots of overall a really great experience, and next year it will be in Atlanta, I think, for the first time. So who knows what my adventures will lead to in terms of that conference, whether I'll be giving another talk, maybe another workshop, you never know. But nonetheless, it was a great experience. Again, I think my biggest takeaways are catching up with some of my good friends from online, as well as meeting some new faces as well. And yeah, some really spectacular talks and other conversations throughout. So again, the recordings should be out hopefully in a couple months, and you can bet that our weekly will be featuring those when they are released. Well, enough of my positconf wrap up, and certainly when Mike rejoins us on the podcast, we'll be sure to get his takeaways from his experience, and it was always fun to meet with him as well. We don't get to meet face-to-face often enough. We haven't met since last year at the conference, so it was great to catch up with him as well. Well, without further ado, let's dive into our actual R Weekly issue. And as I mentioned earlier, it was curated by yours truly, but thank goodness we have some great tooling and automation to put the posts together. So I had tremendous help from our fellow R Weekly team members and contributors like you all around the world with your poll requests and suggestions. Our first highlight to discuss today is actually stemming from the aforementioned positconf. In one of the talks that I could not see live, but I was able to catch the special, you might say, sneak peek at the recording. And it is a topic that if you've been developing R code for a little bit, whether solo or in an organization with team members, you're likely leveraging version control. How you leverage it, that can vary across the spectrum, whether you're a Git wizard or you're just doing enough to get that commit up to GitHub, so to speak. But our first highlight today was a presentation from Megan Harris, who is a data scientist at the Prostate Cancer Clinical Trials Consortium. And in fact, she was also one of the students at the database workshop. I remember she was sitting in the front row where I was close to. But in any event, her talk was titled, "Please Let Me Merge Before I Start Crying and Other Things I've Said at the Git Terminal." Yeah, I feel seen with my early days with Git when I read that title. So obviously, when you see the recording of this, you'll get a lot more of I'll call it the first half of the presentation. We got the links to the slides in the show notes. And by the way, Megan, you are easily one of the top slide crafters I've ever seen with Quarto. These slides need to be seen to be believed. It's a great mix of visuals and just really gets to the point of what she's trying to address. But yeah, really engaging talk. And some of the takeaways I'll call out as I saw the talk and thought about how it relates to my journey with Git. The biggest thing is that it is easy, especially if you're new to this, that when you encounter an issue with Git, to kind of almost freeze a bit and might have like a panic moment of figuring out, what did I just break? And more importantly, how the heck do I get out of this emergency situation? But one of Megan's big talking points here is that there really aren't a lot of emergency situations with Git. You can handle this. You just got to kind of step back, calm down, and leverage some practical tips to get through situations such as merge conflicts. So she does a great job in this presentation about, just what exactly a merge conflict actually is, and really giving you as the Git user a few different ways that you can interact with trying to solve these merge conflicts. And certainly some of these are going to be very basic, whether you're booting up a text editor, looking at the ways that a merge conflict is denoted, what's the syntax for the branch that's trying to come in that particular side of development versus the branch it's trying to merge into. There's different notation around how that looks, and it can look very kind of cryptic at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's really not that bad. And she has a great snippet in the slide deck of her literally solving the example merge conflict in her slides, with the dates being different for what was called a data cut. And she literally just shows how in a text editor within RStudio itself, she just took one of those two dates, cut out the cruft, committed it, and pushed it up the main or master branch. So it does, once you kind of get that sense of, you know what, all merge conflicts will eventually boil down to something like that. And perhaps there's more than a handful of lines, but the process is the same. Step back, don't panic, and find what you're comfortable with to resolve that conflict. And really, it's up to you how you resolve that. She has a fun little shout out to retro gamers like me about how you can put some fun ASCII art in your final file that you're going to push up. Maybe that's not a good idea for production code, but the retro gamer in me sure loved it. But the other key takeaway I'll highlight here is that merge conflicts, you often will find yourself, especially if you're new to this, blaming Git for all your troubles. Like, if I just didn't have to use Git, I wouldn't have to worry about this. You know what? Maybe, again, take a step back, because these conflicts are not really related to Git itself. They are more practical in nature. Maybe you and a team member didn't communicate clearly enough on who was doing what. And maybe there's a more optimal way to set up the structure of your project so that merge conflicts are minimized. And honestly, to be proficient in these situations, you do have to do a little bit of, upskilling, if you will, on, the basics of Git. Maybe you can get away with using a third-party tool like GitHub Desktop, or the pane in RStudio, where the version control pane, where it gives you some point-and-click ways to get your commits done or revert or things like that. But it can't do everything. Sometimes getting a little dirty, so to speak, with the terminal and exploring ways to kind of get out of danger, so to speak, if you're really nervous about dealing with that merge conflict, there's a command called abort for your merge that you can get back to right where you left off before you started that merge request. So there are little nuggets like this throughout her talk that I think once you get the better handle on and you have some real practice with, it's not like something you can just watch this talk and immediately, be changed forever. You have to really put these things in practice. Speaking of practice, she doesn't have this in her resources, but I'll call it out because it's been featured in our Highlights podcast before. But Mael Salman has created that funly named R package called Separpultate. I probably got that wrong again. Sorry, Mael. But this is a great way for you to literally practice different situations of Git right in the confines of R itself. So we'll put that link in the show notes as well. So you could put a lot of the principles that Megan is talking about here into practice in a non-production type project, but it's going to mimic these real world scenarios. So I think booting up that package in RStudio or your preferred IDE of choice is a great way to explore, dealing with merge conflicts, dealing with the tooling around it, and frankly, other tooling around Git itself. I think the best way to learn with Git is to actually do something with it. And if you want you might say a safe space to do that with, Mael's package is a great way to do that. Again, fantastic talk by Megan. Can't wait for y'all to see the recording. But she related to a lot of her journey with Git to her adventures of parenting and travel, which again, as a parent who recently traveled during the summer on a long road trip, yes, I completely relate to all that. And it was great to make those connections. So again, slides are in the show notes. The recordings will be out hopefully in a couple months, but highly recommend to check this out, especially if you do get that little twinge of panic or despair whenever you think of Git. Moving on to our next highlight today, it's always wonderful to see the diverse nature of the R community, especially in terms of geographic distribution and ways of the community getting together in different avenues to share their knowledge and insights and really help each other in their journeys of using R in data science. So our next highlight is a new blog post on the R Consortium talking about the new R community in Ahmedabad, India, that is called the Ahmedabad R User Group, or ARUG for short, and some of its journey to bring those in the life sciences industry in that region together to share their insights about R. And so the interview was with Sanket Sinogia. Sorry if I didn't pronounce that right. He has much experience in statistical programming in data science in the clinical industry. And it was in about 2021 that he was meeting with some fellow collaborators and wondered how they could bring this growing community of R users in Ahmedabad together to share their knowledge. And hence they had the idea of setting up the ARUG group. And over time, they started to get together more. And then they actually, after a lot of planning, a lot of work to mentor new members and to start the foundation, so to speak, they had their first meetup earlier this year in July. And this was a very highly anticipated event called R Evolution, Shaping the Future of Clinical Trials. Again, this is right up my wheelhouse, so to speak, where they had many different featured talks talking about the spectrum of where R is being used throughout the industry, all from, say, creating innovative Kaplan-Meier plots for survival, visualization, looking at ways of Shiny, innovations with Shiny with different use cases, having a roundtable on the different trends in R and the ways to prepare for conferences in terms of getting the most out of that. And really just bringing people together, I think, is the key point here. He talks about how they're leveraging platforms such as GitHub and Meetup to get in touch with the users. But in the end, from what I've seen in this post, it was a highly attended session. And it looks like there is a lot of enthusiasm to level up each other along the way, whether you're new to the industry and R, or those that are wanting to give back, so to speak, some of their learnings. So the post has links to how people are interested in joining the group. There are links to join on that. But overall, it is terrific to see R gaining a lot of momentum in this space, and not just, in my neck of the woods here in the United States, but around the world, whether in Europe or Asia Pacific or other parts of the world. We're seeing R really take off to bring life sciences to another level. So needless for me to say, I'm here for it, and it's really great to see these user groups spin up and really getting the community together. Last but certainly not least, we're going to close out the highlights section today with a great use case in leveraging what is becoming a rapidly growing and very, influential communication platform that many of us are now using in our daily work, and that is Quarto, of course. And in particular, when you are working in an organization and maybe you've done a report or a slide deck, and there's always like a few common themes or common elements that you want throughout these shared in your organization. What is the best way to get people started on the right foot so that you all are kind of starting from the same template, if you will? So this last highlight is addressing just that, and it comes to us from Megan Hall, who is a technical product manager of the hockey group at Zealous Analytics. And coincidentally enough, that's also where my good friend Tan Ho is working as well, as a machine learning and software engineer and statistical data scientist as well. So credit to them for joining the conference. But Megan's talk, which again, I couldn't see live, but she has an accompanying blog post about how they have designed and deployed internal Quarto templates at Zealous Analytics, and some of the tips that you can take from this if you want to go on this journey for creating internal resources around Quarto. So first of all, motivation for why you want to do this. Certainly for me, you want to have consistency in, say, your organization's like theming of these different communication reports or slide decks, again, whatever have you. And you don't want every scientist or data scientist to create these by hand if you want to just make it easy for them to get started. So having a template, I think, is quite valuable. And we've seen this also in the R Markdown ecosystem quite a bit. Lots of templates have been shared in the community with respect to that. And I think in Quarto, we've already starting to see that as well. But again, you can't always use the publicly facing ones. Sometimes you have various elements that you want to share only within your organization, hence the need to figure out how to build these internally. So what actually goes into a template? Megan talks about you want to put in probably some styling elements, whether it's CSS, custom theming, which again, the Quarto site does a terrific job of documenting how you can get one of these off the ground. So you might have, say theming also associated with the visualizations you're doing. Maybe you have a set of core R packages that should be used in each report to help set up some of these more aesthetic elements. She talks about having customized themes for ggplot2 and the GT package for creating tables, so that the scientist who's developing this report can just already have that snippet of code ready to go to load these internal packages that are giving these themes. So that's a great win right there for, reducing manual effort. So she has examples about how they design a certain element to tell that a report is confidential and not to distribute it outside of their walls, so to speak. She talks about how you can go about customizing that element and where that actually goes in your theming and CSS files, so that, again, you can just put that anywhere you like. And if you're still, learning the nuts and bolts of how CSS actually works, trust me, I'm no expert in this either. She has a great tip about using the dev tools, interactive element in Chrome, so you can get to the actual CSS for each element using its inspector or whatnot. And then on the fly, experiment with different parameters, such as like the rounding of corners around this box that she puts at the top of the report. So you can kind of demystify what can be, quite daunting, I would say, when you look at CSS for the first time. You're not really sure what these parameters are doing. So really getting your hands on it in the browser itself is a great way to learn. She also points to resources like the Mozilla Docs that are great for learning CSS as well. And so lots of practical tips on that front. Well, it's one thing to create this bundle. How do you actually share it with the rest of your organization? Much like the R Markdown ecosystem, if you're in the R landscape like we are, you probably want to make an R package for it. And R packages work just as well with Quarto templates as they have with R Markdown templates. So she has a great example with some visuals on how they have constructed a bundle where the package within its inst folder, which is the part of a package where you can put ancillary or accompanying files that will get installed with the package itself when the user installs it on their system. She has folders for these extensions that hold both the HTML and the LaTeX, or you might say PDF, styling files, so that both the printed version in PDF, so to speak, or the static version, as well as the web-based HTML version, have, accompanying style files, whether it's CSS, whether it's custom LaTeX code, along with the Quarto document that actually has the template itself. And when the user utilizes a function, she calls it create zealous HTML for the HTML version, it will copy everything to their working directory and then get that template file set to go as a new file. And then the user can customize it as they wish, but they're already up and running with utilizing that template. And so she has, gained inspiration from this from Spencer Sheehan, and by proxy, Tom Mock, who I also got to see at the conference. So it was great to say hi to Tom, but she leveraged a lot of their previous resources that they've shared on their blog posts to put all this in action. And then lastly, in her post, she has a nice animated GIF to show what this actually looks like when the user sets this up. A simple call to that zealous HTML function, gives it a title, and right there, your Quarto document is right there, open, with everything filled in. What a great way to make this as easy as possible for your rest of your organization to leverage your innovative Quarto templates. I definitely need to start doing this because I was just talking with Will about some day job stuff a couple weeks ago about, hey, we love using Quarto for our slide decks. We not the biggest fans of PowerPoint. At least I'm not. I don't think he is either. So we're thinking of making an organization template based in Quarto for our slide decks because, well, it's another story for another day, but HTML, interactive content, yeah, I think that's a little more engaging than PowerPoint stuff. That's a battle. That's going to be a battle, so to speak, but one I want to take with Quarto at my hip, so to speak, so that we can start leveraging interactive slide decks at my company. So this Megan's post here is very timely because I'm going to use some of these principles in practice to make all this happen. Well, much like I tell you every week, there is so much more that goes into an RE Weekly issue. So we will close up here. I'll talk about an additional find that I have. Again, somewhat related to the conference, but it was eye-opening to say the least. So as I mentioned, I visited the Shiny track at positconf multiple times after my presentation. And there was a terrific session on kind of innovations with Shiny. And one of the talks was from Keegan Rice talking about what are ways that you can build, user-friendly data exploration, paradigms in your Shiny application. And she was inspired by, many of the principles that we talk about in the community quite a bit, but she shared kind of what were the boilerplate of how she created this live crime tracker as part of her daily work at the NORC at the University of Chicago. And this application, my goodness, when you look at this, you are going to be blown away. This is amazing, an amazing application. You would not know it's Shiny by looking at this. It actually has a lot of vibes similar to what I saw shared at the Shiny conference earlier this year by Absalon on one of the apps that I was enamored by. Great organization, great use of interactive maps with tooltips throughout, and a great, comprehensive documentation that's styled very clearly, both about the crime tracker itself, and the methodology around it. This is a great showcase of great user experience, elements. And again, if you just shared it with somebody, there is nothing here that, screams Shiny, so to speak, in terms of the typical UI layout. I don't exactly know what's under the hood on this just yet. I just know that it is a very engaging experience. And knock on wood, so to speak, if things go well later this year, we may dive into this with her even more detail if I can spin up the Shiny Developer Series once again, because I'm hoping to have Keegan on for an episode that we dive into this much further. But in any event, if you want to be inspired by optimal UX design in a Shiny app, I invite you to check out this live crime tracker part of the NORC at the University of Chicago by Keegan Rice. All right, as much as I'd like to talk about the rest of the issue, I'm going to have to close up shop here, so to speak. But as always, where you can go to find more information on R Weekly, well, hopefully it's one place to go, and that's rweekly.org. That's where that's our central hub, if you will. That's where every issue lands on the front page, as well as the archive of all previous issues in case you missed any in the past. There was a great issue last week where Mike and I couldn't record because we were literally at the PositConf, so you want to check out the archive if you haven't already. And also, what's the best way to help the project? Getting involved. We have multiple ways to get involved. If you've seen that great new blog post package that just came through CRAN, or that great resource that you saw throughout, or maybe one that you created yourself, we're just a pull request away. It's at the top right corner, a little banner there. Click that. You'll be taken directly to the pull request template in GitHub. You can do it right in the GitHub editor. No friction required on that front. It's all Markdown all the time. I live Markdown. Who knows, maybe in my dreams I'll dream of Markdown. Well, maybe not that far. Either way, I use Markdown so much. And hopefully it's intuitive enough for you to put in that link to that great resource. And also, we are always looking for additional curators to join our team. There is more information on that on the R Weekly GitHub repository if you're interested in joining our team, where we definitely could use some additional help. People have real lives, and we've lost a couple curators along the way to their real life duties. So being able to have others join the team would be a welcome addition. Also, we love to hear from you in the audience for this humble little podcast. On the show notes of this podcast, you'll find a link to our contact page, where you can get in touch with us directly on that front. And if you're listening to with a modern podcast app like Podverse, Found, or Cast-O-Matic, you can send us one little boost along the way and share your love for the show there. And also, I am on social media, sporadically on the Weapon X thing with at the Artcast, but you'll find me more often on Mastodon, where I am at our podcast at podcastindex.social. And I'm also on LinkedIn as well. Just search my name and you will find me there. So again, thank you so much for joining me on this solo effort today. It's never the same without my trusty co-host, but he'll be back soon enough. And again, huge thank you to all of you at the conference that said hi, and also best wishes to many of the colleagues that I met. There are more than a few of you that unfortunately have contracted COVID, so I hope you're on the road to recovery quite well. I know in these times, these events, there's always that risk, but I'm thinking of you all, and thank you again so much for the great conversations, and I hope you all recover soon enough. Well, that'll do it for this episode of our Weekly Highlights. Thank you so much for joining me today, and we, or at least I, will hopefully be back with another episode either next week or shortly thereafter. Until then, that's end of line.